Welcome to the continuation of that microphone as well. We get more used to it than you do. Harry, we're going to start with some funding recommendations falling over from yesterday's meeting.
Roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's.
Well, I don't care.
No, I think we should. That's why Sheridan and Gerald are close to me to remind me of that sort of thing. We'll do a roll call. Commissioner Lancaster.
Wyoming Water Development Commission, roll call. Nick Bettis. David Evans.
Here.
Gerald Geis.
Here.
Clinton Glick.
Here.
Kellen Lancaster here. Sheridan Little.
Present and accounted for.
Mike Purcell. Jeanette Seekin. Larry Suker. Rod Wagner.
Here.
We have a quorum, Chairman.
In the absence of Chairman Hunt, who do I turn to for your
That would
roll
be me,
call?
I'm
All
sorry.
right, Senator Driscoll.
Roll call on the select committee, please.
Senator Anselmi Dawson. Senator Doxton. Here. Senator Hicks. Here. Senator Meyer.
Here.
Senator Moniz.
Excused.
Representative Blake.
Here.
Representative Eklund. Here. Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Northrup.
Excused.
Representative Paxton.
Here.
Vice Chairman Driscoll.
Here.
Chairman Hunt.
Excused.
We have quorum.
Thank you.
I do want to do audience introductions. It's important for us to know who's come from around the state, and you probably want to know who you're looking at too. So maybe starting with Senator Hicks, if we could go around the table.
Larry Hicks, Senate District 11, all
Meyer, Senate District 3, which is most of Goshen, Niobrara, and the southern part of Weston, includes Newcastle.
Jerry Paxton, House District 47, Albany, Carbon, and Sweetwater counties.
John Eklund, House District 10. It's Eastern Laramie County and part of Goshen County.
Clinton Glick, Wyoming Water Development Commission, Wood River.
Kellen Lancaster, Water Commission District 4, Western Wyoming.
Rod Wagner, Wyoming Water Development Commissioner, District 1.
Dan Larson, House Representative from Powell, Wyoming. Sheridan Little, Wyoming Water Development Commission, Water Division 2.
Gerald Geis, District 3, Big Horn Basin in Fremont County.
David Evans, Wyoming Water Development Commission, District 1, Southeast Wyoming.
Ogden Driscoll, Senate District 1, Kirk, Campbell, and a part of Weston, part of Campbell as well.
Jeanette Seekin, Wyoming Water Development Commission. I live in Cody. I represent Division 3.
I'm Nick Bettis with the Water Development Commission, District 4, out of Kemmer, Southwest Wyoming.
Dan Doxeter, Senate District 16, Lincoln, Teton, and Sublette counties.
Stan Blake, Select Water Committee, House District 39, Sweetwater County.
Daniel Solish with the Wyoming Attorney General's Office.
Katie Talbot, Water Development Office.
Wow. Josh Anderson, LSO. John Roy,
Harry Labate, Director, Water Development Office.
Jody Green, Water Development Office.
Barry Lawrence, Water Development Office. Yeah. John Howell, Manager, Midvale Irrigation District, Pavilion, Wyoming.
Brian Markham, Water Development Office.
Kenny Whalen for County Commission.
John A. Austin Wall in Unicode.
Don Britton, Manager of the Wheatland Irrigation District.
Skylar Wade, Link Associates, Cheyenne.
Steve Walt, State Engineer's Office.
Greg Kerr, University of Wyoming Office of Water Programs.
Gary Vales, Cody Canal Irrigation District. Chris Nicholson, Water Resources Data System. Billy Austin, Western Heritage Consulting Engineer.
Ryan Altenberg, Western Heritage.
John Snyder, Bluff Mountain Bluff Irrigation District.
Ricky Altenberg, Western Heritage.
Pete Roush, Respect Consulting.
Colton Rodovan, Laparelle Irrigation.
Tom Harford, representing Mining Cruise Ditch Company Irrigation District from Sheridan.
Levi Jensen, City of Gillette Utilities Department. Mike Cole, City of Gillette.
Joe Gillis, Boulder Irrigation District Commissioner.
Mitch Cottonwire, Shoshone Arapaho Tribes Tribal Water Engineer.
Kurt Reed, Shoshone Irrigation District Manager.
Jerry Dart, Beaver Irrigation District. Rick Grant, Little Elk Board Member. Dave Winterholler, Level Elk District.
Jason Ringo, Lake Irrigation District.
Yep, Burton, Eaton Valley Irrigation District.
Brian Andrew, Hanson Island East Consulting.
Ryan Thomas, Commissioner of Interstate Irrigation for
Daniel Erickson, Dry Creek Irrigation. Roland Gardner, Dry Creek Irrigation. Jason Linford, Sunrise Engineering. Richard Russell, Big Horn Canal Irrigation District. Joe Wilson, Big Horn Canal Irrigation District. Ryan Dieter, JUP.
All right, thank you, and thanks for coming from all over the state. We'll try to move this along and get it done reasonably so you can return during the daylight. We'll see. I think we start with some motion.
Mr. Chairman, there were two motions that were laid over, both involving Gillette extensions. I would like to add to that list one project, which is the Middle Piney Reservoir O&M account. Your action yesterday was to establish an O&M account for that reservoir in the amount of $500,000, and it would have been funded by funds from the Buffalo Bill Reservoir O&M account. Subsequent conversations that I had yesterday after the meeting, it was suggested that it's probably more appropriate that that reservoir O&M account be established with Water Development Account 3 funds. That was an option that weighed in the office, and I think it is appropriate because it is a reservoir. It's a reservoir O&M account. So I would suggest, or I would recommend that you reconsider that decision and now establish that account with Water Development Account 3 funds, if you're so inclined. And I would bring that as the first order of business this morning.
Thank you.
I'd like to take that in a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I will move to amend the preliminary recommendation for level 3 projects, Middle Piney Reservoir, previously adopted to establish a reservoir account with a $500,000 appropriation from account 3 instead of a transfer from the Buffalo Bill O&M account.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Little and seconded by Commissioner Seacon. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Let's go on to the Gillette extensions.
So, Mr. Chairman, those extensions are found in tabs J and K of your notebook. And yesterday it was, those actions were laid over so that a subcommittee at the lunch hour could work over some language with regards to what might be a suitable replacement for the current amendment that's attached to both of those projects. And Mike Cole, with Utilities Director for the City of Gillette, is here. And I guess, Mike, I'll turn the mic over to you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you for allowing us some time to work through, hopefully some common ground on some language. I thought we had a very productive meeting over lunch yesterday. And what I'll do, and I'd welcome comments from Senator Driscoll. I think we've got 5 key points where we found some common ground for an amendment for this upcoming omnibus water bill. I would caution everyone that I do indeed need to seek approval through our city council. But I think this is something that I think this is a good start for us. And I've talked to Harry outside the meeting about how we work through that between now and your next meeting in December. The first item that we agree upon is taps for the municipal stock water use from the existing 8-inch and 12-inch, I'll call it the treated water transmission line. We've executed one agreement for stock water use. We were comfortable with 5 additional taps for that stock water use. We also are comfortable with allowing use of all the remaining existing taps on that 8-inch and 12-inch line to be used for rural domestic. That's always been the case. I believe there's probably about 15 or so total taps on that line. So with 5, 6 of them being for stock water and rural domestic, the balance would be used for those, for just the rural domestic purpose. The existing water service agreements that have been executed would remain intact. And that, of course, includes the one existing stock water agreement, as well as about 6 existing rural domestic agreements that were executed 12 or 13 years ago. We would propose to use standard water service agreement language that is similar to other individual or wholesale agreements that have been executed in Campbell County. The rates that would be charged would be identical to inside city water customers in accordance with the established ordinances of the city. The one thing that the taps from our conversation yesterday would be more permanent in nature. I think this is, before I lead into this, those are the 5 items we found some common ground on.
Yeah, I very much appreciate your working and reaching out on that. That was good. Probably the only other 2 things, I hope Josh is catching this because it's going to be an amendment, was we could amend those existing ones if you guys agreed and the landowners did.
Yeah, correct. If there's a mutual agreement, we're more than willing to amend those existing
And then
ones.
also there would be the ability upon availability of water and forming of an INS or county district for Crook County to form a district and buy wholesale water through various locations along that line that they work jointly with Joint Powers or the city of Gillette to be able to extend those lines. But those lines would be extended at their own cost with an INS district and maintained by the people that formed it. The reason for the multiples, there's already a vault by one of the subdivisions and that line goes both directions. It could be extended either direction. Is that all right with you, Mike?
Yeah,
That way, assuming there's water available.
Correct. And I think that was until the study is completed. We're kind of trying to figure out what the best source of supply would be for that area. But that's that shouldn't be an issue. I think we have common ground on that as well.
Mr. Chairman, Mike, once again, a huge thank you to you guys.
Sure.
This has been a long time. It's been very contentious.
And Senator, I do have one thing that I think will probably have to come back in December. The one thing that I know our governing body is pretty hung up on is and we talked about it yesterday, is the temporary nature of the stock water use. What I'm going to suggest is that we strike that temporary clause, but for maybe the interim until we got those new water supplies available, we limit some consumption only in the summer months. And I think something that would be reasonable would be for stock water, no more than 80,000 gallons per month. That's about 1 million gallons a year if you used it all year.
I'm very comfortable.
Yeah, and then for domestic is about half of that, which is what's in all the existing agreements that we have already. So I will work to create that as well. but there might be some give and take with council on that when we come back to you in December.
Chairman. Josh, yeah, can we leave some language open for some flexibility with you that, we're going to grant you approval to deal directly with Josh, if that's all right, to, three of us go together on an email chain and get this language. So in December, we've got this where we're in agreement. Hopefully by then your council's given us a green light that this language is acceptable, or we can look at it and make this where we bury this cat and start over again.
Mr. Chairman, I will recommend to our council that we take this language that we've come up with, put it in a resolution format, so it's action of the governing body that we can get to Harry as soon as possible. It might take us a couple weeks to get it to you, but it will definitely be in place in time. So,
Chairman, well, could you make sure that you let me know when that council meeting is? Because unless they do not want me there, I would like to be there. So if we need to do something on the spot, we can do it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Cook County Commissioner Whalen, do you have anything to add this morning?
I guess I'm looking at my notes from
If you would
yesterday.
come up and speak into the microphone.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. On my notes, the only thing that I had was no limit of the gallons they could use. And so what you're talking about is would be limiting it only in the summertime?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. I think that's something that it would be for a temporary basis until we have new water supplies available, which hopefully will be within a year. And it would just be for the summer months, which is our peak demand period.
Mr. Chairman, that looks like everything that we talked about yesterday, according to my notes, and I think we'll be fine with it.
Are there questions or comments of this group on these two projects? Okay. I think the commission might be inclined then to accept Harry's recommendation on the two projects at one time, which then gives flexibility for the parties to negotiate any amendment language as it goes through the December process and onward. And do we have a motion to that effect?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make that motion.
I can second it.
All right, motion made by Commissioner Little and seconded by Commissioner Geis to accept the recommendations of the staff on both regional extension projects. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay? No nays, so motion carries. And thanks everybody for the hard work the last couple days to get this far. And hopefully this is.
Chairman, does this mean we can shorten the next meeting by half a day?
I think Harry's Gillette Madison report will be very short. So, thank you. Okay. If you're ready, Harry, we'll move on to the 2019 funding recommendations out of the rehabilitation program.
Mr. Chairman, the first project for consideration under account 2, rehabilitation, is the Austin Wall Reservoir Rehabilitation 2019. That recommendation is under tab C. And so total proposed project cost, $1,340,000. The proposed budget then for funding assistance is $1,038,500, and that represents a 67% grant and a 10.5% loan. And they are proposing, the sponsor is proposing a Bureau of Reclamation grant, a Water Smart grant for $301,500 to fund that project. The Water Smart grant is not yet in place. The sponsor needs to make an application for the next funding cycle there. And my recommendation was for no funding for this project simply because we don't have adequate funds in account 2. And I think appropriately, rather than tying up our funds while they pursue Water Smart funds. In this case, I'm recommending that they pursue the Water Smart funds. When they get those in place, then come back to the commission to seek approval of the 67% grant through this program. So we have a representative from this district, and I've spoken with him this morning. He would like, John, come on up, at least to talk about the condition of this structure, because they do have some urgent issues with the outlet works.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is John Ayer. I'm with the Austin Wall. And I'm here. I sort of feel like Dorothy of the Wizard of Oz as I step before the Great Oz. And I didn't know the Great Oz was going to be sitting right beside me.
Except the Great Oz is always an illusion.
With that, I hope I didn't offend anybody because all I want to do is get back to Kansas. I really don't have any overpowering or highly compelling reasons for asking that this project be funded, other than I would like to explain a few things, if I may, Mr. Chairman. The Austin and Wall establishment was sort of my idea several years ago. And the main purpose I had at establishing the district at that time was to rehabilitate, for me personally, the Austin Wall Reservoir. It took us about a year to create that district. We got it established. It took us 2 years of study of our project in total, and that was able to be accomplished thanks to the benevolence of this group. And then we submitted our first project, to my dismay, at least to put in a piping project rather than to rehabilitate our dam. And we done that specifically because of the salinity funds that were readily available at the time. So that took us another 2 years. Now I'm in the process of trying to get our dam rehabilitated. I would like just to explain a little bit of the conditions of our dam. If you stand on the top of the dam and look off to the lee side, you'll see water coming out of the base of the dam at a pretty good rate. We're losing about 4 second feet of water through the base of the dam, which sounds somewhat alarming, other than it's coming through a pervious rock that is not very erodible, and so it's relatively stable. But nevertheless, we have that condition, and the state engineer, at least at one time, wrote me a letter to the Wall Canal saying that if we didn't get that fixed, that we wasn't going to be able to use that reservoir anymore, which I can understand that. So we have that problem. This facility was built before World War II. Probably the only person in this room that can really appreciate that is Senator Geis. Maybe he could even appreciate if it predated World War I. I'm not exactly sure. I appreciate Senator
Thank you for the
Geis.
comment.
I hate to make an enemy here before we even get started, but the structure is old. To add to that, as we went to open the head gate this summer to irrigate, the screw mechanism broke away from the slide gate. We had a pretty tough summer in Bridge Valley. This summer we needed the water to finish our second crop alfalfa. So we hired a track hoe to come in to try and delicately reach down into the head wall structure and see if he could hook the slide gate and open the reservoir. he did that successfully, other than he did some irreparable harm to the head wall. Broke the sides off. I don't know if the integrity of the structure has been, anything has happened to that, but we're in a bad situation with regards of trying to get that facility back so it'll hold water. I think we can, but if I went and showed the state engineer what we was doing, he might come and cut both hands off at the wrists, so I couldn't continue. But nevertheless, that is the situation we're facing. Little Bondi here said that they're short of funds and doesn't want to commit these funds until we have the other funds. It seems like, as we have talked to the other people, they will commit the funds, but they would like to have your funds in place. Somebody has got to go first. And I appreciate, the commissioner here, or the chairman, being able to look after the water development funds in a good manner. I served on the select water. I understand what is taking place here. All I can say is we need help. And I suppose if we wait another year, I don't know whether that's going to remedy the shortfalls in the water funds. I suspect, it'll either be the same or maybe even worse. We all like to be first in line at the financial trough, so to speak. So with that, I would just say that we're still looking for the funds. We've been told, at least, that the funds that are coming from the Bureau are available, and we could get them. If we could get somebody to go first, we could start construction next fall. But if not, we've got to wait at least now another year to start. Me being somewhat in the same stature of Senator Geis, I don't know how many more summers I'm going to have to keep this thing going. I don't, that's neither here nor there. But I would like to at least see the completion of this reservoir, because it is important. Even though it is a small structure, it is important to the users that are depending on that for water. And with that, I'll say thank you.
Let me ask Harry if he has a response to that first.
So, Mr. Chairman, I guess I would offer a question to Mr. Ayers that, in fact, we had talked. Were you interested in potentially partial funding to look at the outlet structure or outlet works? That seems to be the main priority at this point in time.
That's the main priority at this time, and we would be willing to consider that. The only thing we're not exactly sure of how the Bureau funds, whether in making two applications, whether we would have to make two applications again to the Bureau for the matching funds. And I guess I'd have to step aside for our engineering company if they could have a definite answer to that. But I'm not sure what that would be.
So, Mr. Chairman, you have on page 1 of the recommendation, or page 2 of the recommendation, the estimate. And as you see in there, the outlet work structure removal and replacement is valued at about $250,000. When I add the 10% allowance for design and 10% allowance for construction engineering, and then we apply contingencies at 15%. But when we do that analysis just for the outlet works, it becomes a $350,000 outlay. And sorry, I didn't have this number calculated. When I apply the funding, well, so if we were to fund that totally with loan and grant, then that could be a consideration of the commission, that you would look at $350,000 appropriated out of this fund. We still have the issue of, as you know, not enough available funds. We're talking about a transfer of funds from Buffalo Bill account 1 to account 2. That would provide funding that I think, at least for the outlet work, that you can consider.
Are there, Commissioner Seacon?
Harry, you have this ranked on our priority list as 6, so that would mean that that would then jump above some that are the priorities higher. And also, that is a question, but also, are the users paying into a sinking fund? Have you been using a sinking fund for repairs over the years? An O&M fund? And
Mr. Chairman, in answering that, we don't have a fund other than we have an assessment where we can raise funds to do what we done on a per share basis.
do you do that? Have you been doing that?
Yes, we assessments to whatever the needs of the system are.
If I read this right, you're only generating $3,000 a year for this then? Is that what I get out of it?
Chairman and Commissioner Bettis, that's right. It's a small operation, and we only generate the amount of money that needs to cover our O&M and our emergency problems. We haven't built a fund. We'd rather keep that fund in our personal pocket and then assess as the needs come.
This discussion yesterday, and there was a new bill passed that says you don't have to do that, but this is one of the very reasons that I think there needs to be an O&M account that has enough money in it so that it keeps up with the O&M that you actually are incurring over the years. And I think you came to us once before, I'm not sure when that was, and I think at that time you were at or near zero, and you upped it to $2. If I understand that right, I'd suggest when you talk about you don't know where you're going to start, I think you need to start with yourself and start assessing yourself some money to try to keep up with this O&M account. Now, I'm all for trying to help you out here. This is one of the very reasons that there needs to be an O&M account for the irrigation.
Any other questions or comments, Harry?
So, Mr. Chairman, comment to Commissioner Seacon. When you look at this schedule, and as I was developing my recommendations with the understanding that there's only $9 million available, I started with the lowest priorities and started making recommendations of 0. So the studies were priority 8, 2 studies at priority 7 recommended 0. And this project at a priority number 6 was recommended for 0 funding, and then moved into the Dry Creek and Eden Valley requests. The Dry Creek was a 3, so I started up the bottom of the priority list. And so Eden Valley is a different story that I'll share with you in regards to my recommendation. But I think we've been consistent in that priority schedule. So if you were to consider a portion of this project, then I would put it in the same category as if Buffalo Bill account 1 funds are transferred in here, that it would be funded in this reduced amount just for the outlet works. That's something for your consideration.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Well, I think that could be pulled out of a block motion, but for now, that's, thank you for your information.
Mr. Chairman, the next project for your consideration is under the second tab D. It's the Bighorn Canal Irrigation District Wasteway Rehabilitation 2019. Total project budget $960,000. Project is to replace the Elk Creek Wasteway / check structure in the system. This was a priority that was identified in the 2013 Level 2 study. The sponsor is seeking a 67% grant and a 33% loan for the project. So you, in this proposal, you would be funding the entire cost of the project. And I believe we have representatives from Bighorn.
Hello. Hello, Larry. Morning. How are you?
Introduce yourself and make any.
Yep. I'm Richard Russell with the Bighorn Canal Irrigation District. We are in Washakie County and Bighorn County. We serve about 24,000 acres. We raise, our members raise sugar beets, malt barley, pasture for beef cattle, corn, a lot of crops. And this project is one that was identified in our study as being deficient, and we value it as extremely instrumental in providing accurate and reliable flows for our members. Our past projects that we've participated in with the WWDC have been extremely successful, and we appreciate the time and the ability to come talk to you guys.
Any questions, comments, either the district or? We appreciate it, and we'll move on these projects as a block to the extent that we can.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Harry.
Chairman, the next project under tab E, Upper Bluff System Improvements 2019. This project would replace 2 aging pumps in pumping plant number 1. With those pump replacements, they would add variable frequency drives, which improve the efficiency of the pumping operation. And then they're also looking at some structural repairs to the pumping plant number 1 building. Total project cost $366,000, and the district is seeking a 67% grant and 33% loan in regards to this project.
Welcome. If you could introduce yourself and make any comments you need to make.
Mr. Chairman, my name is John Snyder. I'm representing the Bluff and Upper Bluff Irrigation District in Worland. Our district is a very small district, about 1,400 acres. It was a Bureau Reclamation project. Unfortunately, the system is actually older than I am. And so it is in need of some repairs. The pumping plant that we are talking about, we have repaired several times. Actually, the last time that we took one of the pumps to one of the machine shops, they told us not to bring it back, that they couldn't do any more to it. So we have started looking at different ways of trying to fund this. As the specs show, it is variable VDF pumps. Unfortunately, the technology that we need to save electricity and save water is very expensive. And so we are here asking for funding for that. It's my understanding that we received notice yesterday that we did get WaterSmart money for that project. And so that is helping us out also. So the importance of this is that it serves a portion of our system. We actually have 3 different pumping plants on the system. But everything under this system, obviously, these pumps are crucial to the landowners, also to the economy of the Worland area. Our patrons raise sugar beets, malt barley, corn, pasture, alfalfa seed, alfalfa. I also serve on the board of directors for Almond Sugar, and each acre that we grow by our owners, it is a farmer-owned cooperative, is extremely important to our process. So there's several acres under this project that's grown in sugar beets, and it's important to the economy of Worland. Without these pumps, if they were to go down during the middle of summer, we would have a complete crop failure. And so that is why we're before you today. Appreciate the time. And I don't know if you have any questions or not.
Are there any questions?
Looking at your report here, I see that your assessment's $40 an acre.
$40 is actually the largest assessment in the area by a substantial amount. It is pretty high. Unfortunately, in a small, we're about 1,400 acres. And so anytime you try to do something, it takes a lot of money. I mean, we could raise our assessments by 50% and still not generate a lot of dollars. Unfortunately, like I said, the cost of the technology today is substantial. And that's why we're coming to you for help.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Mr. Snyder. You've received award of a Water Smart grant. Are you looking to substitute that for the loan? Your application requests? And if so, how much is the Water Smart grant for?
It's for a portion of it. I believe it's for $75,000.
Commissioner Pettis.
This year you have 5,300 acres. You're saying you don't have 5,300?
The upper bluff, this project is for we actually have two different canals. We run as one canal system, but there's two different canals. There's the upper bluff. It is pumped out of the bluff up into the other, to a smaller, and that's, the upper bluff is 1,400 acres. No, the assessment for the bluff is lower.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, and
maybe clarification. I think the assessment for the bluff is more in line with the other canal systems in the area. It still might be a little higher than some, but it's more in line with what the other canal systems are doing. The bluff is not, it's all gravity flow. So that's why the assessment is lower.
And that you're going to keep the assessment at $40 and not increase that because you think you can take care of that?
It's probably going to have to be increased to take care of the loan. Yes. We're also faced with, the Bureau of Reclamation has notified us that they're wanting to increase our power rate substantially. We're going to be in negotiations for that, but they're also asking for a substantial increase in the power rate.
did you?
Well, the upper bluff mostly is under sprinkler systems. I think a lot of it is anymore.
Through the years, a lot of the landowners have converted to center pivots because of the efficiency of the water. When I first got on this canal system board, we were always short of water. In fact, there was a couple years when we just flat didn't have enough water to irrigate the crop properly. So a lot of us have converted from flood irrigation to sprinkler irrigation pretty substantially, probably here the last 10 or 15 years.
Any other questions? So the area that the recommended funding might be reduced by $75,000.
Mr. Chairman, I would recommend that you authorize the total loan amount today, and then we'll work with the district in developing the bill, and if we can reduce that loan amount, we will do so accordingly.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Next project, Terry.
Mr. Chairman, the next project is the Cody Canal Irrigation District Rehab. This project is to replace open ditch with pipe systems on 2 separate laterals. Total project cost $646,649. This is a 100% materials only grant project. So just a refresher on those projects, the commission pays for 100% of the invoiced materials. That could be pipe, it could be bedding material, it could be concrete, as the case may be. And then the sponsor is responsible for one, having it designed by a professional engineer, paying for all labor, fuel costs, equipment costs associated with the installation of the project. And those projects have been very successful with a number of districts. So the total budget here, $344,000, and that is my recommendation.
Welcome. If you could introduce yourself and make any comments.
Well, thank you for hearing from me today. My name is Jerry Bales. I'm the manager, Cody Canal Irrigation District. I'd like to thank you for the lateral study that we just completed, looking into the potential two pipe. A lot of our laterals come up with a lot of preliminary numbers to go forward with. And that's what this application is for, is to move forward with two of our smaller laterals, get our feet a little wet in this category and in these, and then we will have a lot more in the future trying to upgrade. These here particular ones are the earthen ditches that we will be upgrading. In the future, we've got some cement ditches that were put in back in the, what was it, 50s, when that was a big kick, and they're starting to dilapidate and going to need some rehabilitation. And all this is within the focus to try and conserve water, reduce maintenance costs on a routine basis, and urbanization is hitting Cody Canal, and the more we can put in pipe, the less conflict we will have with all these people that were, going through their yards and whatever as different things progress. So that's where I appreciate your consideration for this funds.
Thank you. Any questions or comments of the district or?
A lot of this goes right down in the main part of Cody.
Yes, these two particular laterals are not part that go into Cody, but there is a larger one, and that's one that we, in the future, when we tackle it, it'll be a lot of backyards, and yeah, it won't be fun, but I figured we better get our feet wet on this a little bit and get some of the little tricks figured out. I mean, we've used your funds in the past for one other large cement structure that we redid a few years ago on the same funding basis, and it was a very successful project. So,
all right, thank you very much. And
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, this is also a 100% materials only grant request. Proposed budget then $424,000 in material costs, and my recommendation is to fund.
welcome. Go ahead and introduce yourself and tell.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Jerry Dart. I am the manager of the Deaver Irrigation District. Deaver is a original Bureau Reclamation project. We're on the tail end of the Shoshone project. We receive our water through the Corbett Tunnel, which, being at the end of the project, anything we can do to conserve water is a priority to us. The 129 lateral is on the Franny, and it is on the upper reaches of the Franny Canal, which makes it advantageous that if we were to design this project as a closed system, meaning that the only time water is drawn out of the main canal would be when there was a demand at the valve, that can save water, as opposed to the traditional open weir, open line, which it is an open ditch lateral right now. So we saw an advantage in trying to design this project after we put it in the level 1 study. It was put in the level 1 study as a priority because it is a classic example of a lateral that is flat, mosses up, seeps. It's at the top of a sandstone hill, more or less. And every time we go in there to try to moss it or clean it to get it to flow, we just make things worse. So we are seeking funding from you. We are very appreciative of all the support. This is another classic example of trying to conserve water, but I wish that I'd had the ability to quantify realistic water savings because this ditch has very little water measuring devices on it whatsoever. But I'll tell you, as the manager, I can go up there on any one given day and put 5 feet of water in it, and I'll have about a foot of water at the end of the lateral. It's that serious. Now, that's with moss. So there's a great deal of water loss that's occurring, and we're hoping to get this project funded, and I thank you for your appreciation. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, next project under second tab H, Dry Creek Irrigation District Rehabilitation. This project will replace approximately 14,000 linear feet of 10, 12, 14, and 16-inch steel pipeline. They'll replace that with PVC. The issue is the age and corrosion that's taken place on these pipelines. Total project cost $1,628,000, and sponsor is seeking a 67% grant, 33% loan. This is one of the projects that I am not recommending funding unless the transfer from Buffalo Bill to account 2 does occur. If it does, then I would fully recommend funding. It's a needed project at that point in time. My reasoning for including this project initially is no recommendation, is that, as you see in the schedule, it rates as a priority 3, which is transmission lines. And so it fell out due to lack of funding on that basis.
Thank you, Mr.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry, Roland Gardner, president of the Dry Creek Irrigation District. First, I want to thank you guys for, number one, doing the study, and then we just finished up phase 1 of our project. The study recommended that we tackle this in phases, and so we picked the worst area with the most problematic pipe, and we replaced that this year. And then this is phase 2, moving on to the next section that we're having the most troubles with, leaky pipe. System's been in since 70, so it's 47, 48-year-old pipe, and we're just starting to have a lot of leaks, a lot of broken down pipe. So if we can go on to this phase 2, is if we can approach this every couple of years, do a phase and get through this in a lengthy time before we have a pretty serious system failure, it would be great. And again, we appreciate all you guys have done to help us. Phase 1 went really well. We appreciate the commission and their help. And anytime we had a question or a problem. So if you guys could transfer this funds and include this project, we'd really appreciate it.
Legislature would have to transfer the funds upon our recommendation. We're hopeful they do that.
If that occurs. Okay.
Any questions or comments from any of these folks? All right. Thank you. And we did discuss this yesterday as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the next project is the Eden Valley Irrigation District System Improvements 2019. This is a smaller project, but they're looking to design and construct a lining in a section of canal that also includes a sand trap. The total project costs $650,000, and the sponsor is seeking a 54% grant. They'll supplement that with salinity control dollars from the Bureau of Reclamation at 46%. This also was a project that I recommended no funding due to the financial situation in account 2. If the transfer of funds, as we've discussed, occurs, then I would recommend funding for this particular project.
Welcome. If you'd introduce yourself. And
Burton, Eden Valley Irrigation District. I appreciate your concerns here and the assistance that you've given us over the years. And I understand the situation here, and I hope we can make it all work. If you have any questions, just go for it.
Do you have any questions of either the district or Harry? All right. Well, again, it's our intention to recommend transferring the funds, and then the select committee pick it up from there.
All right, thank you guys.
Gary?
Mr. Chairman, the next project is the Interstate Irrigation and Reservoir Irrigation District Rehabilitation 2019. The request from the sponsor is a fairly extensive project. Will include the replacement of a diversion structure and convert approximately 11 miles of earthen canals to pipe and install energy dissipation structures along the way. So total project cost, $9,002,000. They are seeking a 67% grant. The sponsor's 33% share, they're looking at a couple of different sources. Trout Unlimited potentially could help with the funding of the diversion structure. They get involved when there are fish passage issues, so Trout Unlimited has funded a number of projects across the state. And then with regards to the piping of the canal, they are seeking salinity control dollars, but that application is due June of 2019. So that part of the funding is yet to be secured. My recommendation is to fund this in parts. It's too big a project for us to fund in account two, so I'm recommending the funding of the diversion structure, which I believe is your number one priority system. Okay, so that portion, to pull that out, 67% grant on that would be $417,100. That's my recommendation. I do need to point out to you that that structure, as well as most of the canal system, is located in Utah. However, it serves lands in Wyoming. And if you go into the recommendation, at the end of it are a couple of maps. And if you look at the first map, the scale on the top shows 1 inch equals about 2 miles. You see that at the top. About a third of the way down, that line is the state line between Wyoming and Utah. All of those shaded areas in green, is everybody at that map? All of those shaded areas represent the irrigated lands, and the significant or the predominant portion of those lands are located in Wyoming. Wyoming acreage, the total acreage, 2,035 acres. 19,066 acres are located in Wyoming, so that's about 96 plus, almost 97% of the lands. There is just a tiny portion of the lands that are located in Utah. They represent about 3.4% of the total. And as you look at the map, then at the end of, you see the interstate canal. The interstate canal is primarily located in Utah. At the end of that canal, in the lower left-hand quadrant of the map, is the location of the diversion structure. So diversion's out of Burnt Fork Creek, and that creek does flow into Wyoming, but they're diverting. You have a Utah water right with regards to diverting that water, bringing it to Wyoming. So I point that out that is a little different than other projects we see in this program, but certainly the benefits accrue predominantly to lands in Wyoming. Questions, Mr. Chairman?
Question here.
Let's hear from the district.
Oh, okay.
You could, introduce yourself.
Sure.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Chairman, board. Thank you for having us here. I just want to say thanks for the level 1 study that you provided for us, because 6 years ago we started out as a nobody, and here we are finally. We're getting there somewhere. But so now we were just recently formed a district, so we're here for the level 3 study, and yeah, like he was saying, we need to really update our headgate infrastructure. To me, that's el numero uno on the list, being that's the point of the diversion. That's where all of our irrigatable waters come together and are put into our canal. The structure itself was built, late 40s, and it's It's been expired for about the last 20 years now. It's in pretty rough shape. I'm just glad that I was able to get with Hillary Walrath with the Trout Unlimited. Supposed to get with her in December and move forward with that for aid and funding this project. Also, another interesting thing is Kevin Payne, Wyoming Commissioner, him and John Yarborough, they have some automated head gates or actuators for the new head gates that they will donate to us once we can get a new infrastructure in place, because the remoteness of where our head gates are, it is time consuming for not only us as users, but the water commissioners to access. So this way we can control them off a satellite and get on the computer. And I don't know if that's with the state engineer's office website that we could do that. Exactly how it works, I don't know yet. But the nice thing is we would be able to pull it up on the computer and see, and it's a plus or minus 10% fluctuation. So it'll take into account any high water, low water, and keep us in the CFS that we want. So, but thank you again for hearing us, and sure do appreciate your help thus far.
Thank you. Any questions, Commissioner Bettis?
Quick question. Are you guys members of the Rock Springs Grazing Association? Another question, follow-up. I see that the sponsor's portion of this total project is going to be $3 million. I guess I'm kind of wondering from a financial standpoint, based on your assessment of only 2,000 acres, or excuse me, yeah, how you plan on paying for this?
Well, we're hoping with the help of our engineer firm that we get federal money.
This is Brian Andrew. I'm with Hands Down Loose. That portion would be under salinity funds from the Bureau of Reclamation. That's the funding that's coming up that we spoke about earlier.
And then I guess I've got a question for Harry then. Harry, if we give them the additional or the initial $417,000, are we jumping in this $9 million pool forever?
So, Mr. Chairman, this project does have components that can be phased, and so my recommendation is for funding of the diversion structure, the structure only. That is a standalone structure, so that will encompass the entire entity or the entire description of this project. For them to fund the canal would require a subsequent application to be considered at a future year. So it is specific only, my recommendation is specific only to the diversion structure.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so you're going to seek salinity control money from the BOR. Is this a BOR project was the first question. And the second question, do you know the source of funding that Trout Unlimited is supplying? Where are they getting their funds from?
With the Trout Unlimited, no, not as of yet. Like I said, I met with Hillary Walrath a month and a half ago, but she said it would have to be the first part of December before they could do their end of the part, their end of the deal, which she had no doubt that it would be good to do, that it would be okay. They've done projects similar to this on the Henry's Fork that drains into the Fleming Gorge Reservoir.
So the second question was, is this a BOR project irrigation? Was it originally, is it private irrigation?
No, we're a private irrigation.
It's a private.
Yeah.
Commissioner Wagner.
Well, looking at the expense of this and a $4 a year or $4 an acre assessment, you guys haven't got a lot of skin in the game.
Well, no, because with our original bylaws as the Interstate Irrigation Reservoir Company itself, before we became the district, that was part of the bylaw that no share would be assessed more than $4 a year. So we do a $2 spring and a $2 fall assessment. We've got probably I don't have the finance report with me, but somewhere's around 40,000 in an account. Just, yeah, we're a small little co-op outfit that we're trying to get some speed and get up to date and get our system developed and improved, because we're in the same boat as the previous irrigation districts. Is like, our water is horrible. Like this year, we were shut off July 9th. We were done with irrigation water. And also over the last 12 years, on-farm sprinkler irrigations have been starting to pop up more and more, just to be able to conserve and stretch your water better and be more efficient. But as the canal system as a whole, we lose so much water through what's called the Gamble Flat, that through NRCS studies, we lose half of our water just in that one section of ditch. That, my goodness, that would stretch us out for a lot longer throughout the irrigation season, for sure.
I'd also like to answer the interstate irrigation, as was stated earlier, also has 3 reservoirs up in the Uinta Mountains on the Utah side. And their biggest one is Beaver Meadow Reservoir, which part of level 1 was studying some deficiencies with that reservoir. What they're trying to do, when you said skin the game, they do have, like you said, 2 accounts, nearly $40,000 as a rainy day or exceptional maintenance that they've built up. So they've been pretty frugal and pay as you go, but try to develop, additional funds. What they're trying to do with this project is maximize. They have both in-stream flow water rights and then storage rights. And they are not trying to extend their normal storage rights for about a month and a half for an additional, cut of their pasture hay and things. And they're willing to make it somewhat economically feasible with the smaller diversion, but instead of putting in 70 CFS and getting 35 where they need it, with the pipeline, put in 35 and get 35, which then lets them use their storage. But they have some water rights they can't utilize, but it lets them get some pipe, in a project instead of something that's really not economically feasible for them. Does that answer your question a little bit? Really. Okay, sorry.
I'm from a district that's we're only 11,000 acres, but our assessment's $11.50. And we're one of the cheaper when you get down in our valley. We're looking at $28 an acre. Yeah.
Well, and yeah, now that we just we're formed a district, we're still in doing our bylaw phase part of it. So that's definitely going to be in the consideration on the new district bylaws. So,
yeah, Mr. Chairman, so here your recommendation is for 67% grant, 33% loan. Is that correct? Or 33, just 67% grant.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, that is correct.
Well, I guess it's regardless of the assessment, it's the same deal as regardless of what your assessment is. They're only asking for 67% grant. They're still on the hook for the other 33%, which is 137,610. Guess if they can find some other way to finance that other than the assessment, that's up to them. It's the same deal with everybody else. That makes sense. Sure. I think it gets to the issue of the assessment is they're not getting any better deal than anybody else if they're capable of coming up with their own $137,000. So.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner
What
Madison?
is that interest rate the state charges on the loans?
Mr. Chairman, 4%.
Any other questions, comments? Thanks for your information.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just hold tight.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Senator Hicks' question is caused me to look. The total cost for the Burnt Fork diversion structure is the $417,000. And so actually a 67% grant will be 67% of that number. So the proposed budget is 60. It's the wrong number. I'll calculate the right number, but it's going to be a reduced amount. Thank you, Senator Hicks, for pointing that out. We have a mistake. We'll round that to $280,000 in round numbers. So.
Other questions or comments?
I have a question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that last page, I see a portion owned by Beck. Is that Doug Beck? Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thanks again.
All
Have a
right.
good day.
Sorry, Commissioner Glick, I didn't understand the concern on the microphone, but okay. If anybody can hear, just speak up and ask for the microphone to be placed better. Lakeview, Harry?
Chairman, Lakeview Irrigation District, this is a project to replace the Carter Creek siphon. It was identified in the 2012 master plan. Total project cost $351,000. The sponsor is seeking a 67% grant and 33% loan for that project. So the total proposed budget, $351,000.
Welcome. Can you introduce yourself?
Good morning. I'm Jason Brengle from the Lakeview Irrigation District. I'm a board member there. This project is, like I say, was identified in our master plan as a priority for replacement. It's about a 50-year. I think it was constructed in the 50s, so it's reached its service life and at risk of failure. So it's on the main canal. It's a spillway and a siphon where it crosses Carter Creek. So, that's. Thank you for considering our project.
Any questions or comments?
That was painless.
Mr. Chairman, the next project, the Level Irrigation District Moncourt Lateral Rehab 2019. This project involves converting 8,700 feet of irrigation canal to a pipe system. Total project budget, total project cost $2,637,402. The sponsor is seeking a materials-only grant in the amount of $1,670,000 for this project.
Welcome. If you could identify yourself.
Trent with the Level Irrigation District, and I'd like to thank this group for all the funding they've given us in the past and closing another lateral, and especially in our master plan. In our master plan, why we didn't know where we would get the funding for this project, so we put it down on the list instead of having it number one. But through the years, it's always been our number one project because of all the seepage. And so we've found some other opportunities for funding, and we're looking forward to going ahead with our number one project. There's a lot of seepage on this lateral, and it'll really improve we lose about 30% of the water. And so it'll improve not only the savings on water, but it'll improve the ground for the producers.
Any questions of either the district or Harry? All right. Thanks for coming. Thank you.
Chairman, the next project is the Midville Irrigation District Rehabilitation 2019. Again, this is a 100% materials-only grant request. They are seeking $559,000 for materials on this project. Go ahead, John.
Mr. Chairman, my name is John Howell. I'm manager of Midville Irrigation District in Pavilion, Wyoming. I want to thank the Select Committee and the commissioners and the WWDC for all the support that we've had throughout the years to try to keep our system operating. It's a challenge. We're approaching our centennial anniversary here in about a little over 2 years. So a lot of our infrastructure reflects that. The projects we have before you today are about a total of a mile of pipeline conversions. One of the sections precipitated from a BOR facilities inspection, which they do periodically on a regular basis. It was basically a concrete lined open ditch. And it's a fairly major lateral in our system. It's typical flows are up around 60, 70 CFS and serves a lot of acres. That liner was basically crumbling before our eyes, and in some cases, we'd have to remove pieces of the liner just to maintain the flow in the liner. So it was in pretty bad shape. They recommended that we fix the problem, which they let us decide what that meant. We talked about trying to patch or fix the liner, but the subsoils in that area are saturated, they're unstable, and my experience with concrete on basically mush is it doesn't do very well and it doesn't last very long. So we decided probably a better long-term solution for that was to put it in a pipe and hopefully get the soils a little drier and have a long-term solution. That was half of it. The other half is a sublateral off of that 5-mile lateral, and it's in very rough shape, very hard to deliver water, open ditch, failing, fairly typical of a lot of the older parts of the system that we see. So that's pretty much the total of what we're trying to accomplish on these projects.
Thank you. Any questions on this project? Comments? None. Harry?
Okay. Mr. Chairman, next project
Thanks for coming over.
is the Shoshone Irrigation District Rehabilitation 2019. This also is a materials only, 100% materials only grant request. The sponsor is requesting $181,000, and the project involves replacing 2 drop structures on the Garland Canal, along with new concrete structure, and 2 ditch segments, lateral 16U and BOV1 with buried pipe. So,
If you could identify yourself.
I'm Trent Reed with Shoshone Irrigation District. I'm the new guy. So just started as a manager there back 1st of June. So thank you guys for all the support you guys have given us over the years. It's been hugely helpful. The 2 pipelines that we were looking at putting in, they're both old concrete laterals. They're broken up very badly. We're getting some leak spots in them, and then also they moss up very heavily, and they require a lot of attention through the summer. The drop structures, after this winter, we've replaced 27 of the 31 of the structures. Of course, they're original structures from 1908, so hopefully next few years we'll be done with those. So.
All right. Is there any questions or comments on this project? Well, thank you for coming down.
All right.
Okay.
Good.
Good to see you again.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, next project is the Wheatland Irrigation District Tunnel Dam Rehabilitation 2019. You heard a little bit about that yesterday as we closed out the level 2 feasibility study for the project. Estimated total cost for the project, let's see, about $5.2 million. Actually, about $5.2 million. And as you heard yesterday, structure is old. It's showing its age. It's been resurfaced once. This project would basically rehab the structure again, which is needed. I'll let Don talk about the acreage as it serves, but For cash flow reasons in this fund, we cannot afford to fund the $5.2 million at this point in time. So my recommendation is, I believe it's a very much needed project. So I'm recommending that we proceed with design only for this structure to get the project moving. That represents a $388,000 appropriation, which would be 67% grant, 33% loan. That done.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Don Britton, manager of the Wheatland Irrigation District. And I know there's pictures in here of the tunnel dam. It is to the point where it's just flaking off every day some. We have a head gate that sounds like one that a gentleman back there had. We had three tires in the head gate to try to stop the water because we can't shut it off. It's right in the river. And one popped out, so now we have a 2-tire head gate. So we're working on getting ready to get things fixed. So I just wanted to share that with you, that everything's falling apart, and it just seemed like in the last 3 years, it's going downhill pretty fast. So, and for those of you that don't know, it's the only place we can take water out of the Laramie River and get it into our system down below. The farmers would be out of business and out of luck because, if we don't get it fixed sometime. So.
Don, yesterday I asked if the staff could guarantee the dam would last another 117 years, and I assume that you'll still be running the Wheatland Irrigation District 117 years from now. Is that right?
Well, I started there in 1982, May 5th of 82, and about outlasted everybody, but I don't know how long that's going to go. So. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask your permission to read something that before it is too late for me to do it. So I'd like to thank all of you past and present who have worked to keep the water development program managed well to the benefit of Wyoming and its residents. Wheatland Irrigation District has participated in the program since 1989. We have appreciated every piece of advice, studies, grants, loans, and we have received in the past 9 years. I look forward to working with the Wyoming Water Development Commission and the Water Development Office in future planning. Thank you again.
Thank you. Any questions of either Don or Harry on this one? Okay. Thank you, Don. We'll move on to Wind River Council Rehab.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So this is really the third project or phase for irrigation rehabilitation work that we've been undertaking or funding on the Wind River Indian Reservation. I note in the project description, third line, it says phase 4. That should actually be phase 3.
Yeah.
This project total budget total project cost $1,858,000. In discussing the project with Mitch, because the tribes have access to now a new funding source, WIN Act, Irrigate Act, that passed 2 years ago, Mitch?
That's correct.
So they've been able to bring part of those federal dollars into the reservation for this type of work, and so we, in those situations, we match that federal grant with a 50% state grant. So proposed recommendation for appropriation on this project, $929,000.
Mr. Chairman, Mitch Cottonware, Tribal Water Engineer for the Shoshone and Arapaho Tribes. I'd just like to start off and like to thank the Commission and Select Water for their support in the past. As Harry said, we're moving into phase 3 of our rehabilitation. Since 2010, with the help of the Wyoming Water Development Commission, we've been able to do over $10 million in rehabilitation on the Wind River Reservation.
when we first started, there were about $90 million in deferred maintenance on the reservation. We've been working with Senator Barrasso's office and Harry, and we've moved that the Win Act, Irrigate Act into fruition. This past year, there was about $17.8 million that was appropriated for that purpose. It wasn't put into the irrigation Win Act fund in the Treasury Department, but rather it was put into the Bureau of Indian Affairs irrigation account. We were able to, along with the $929,000 that's been made available to us, we were also able to access $550,000 in that fund to do an emergency repair project on the reservation. So in actuality, we got about $1.4 million in Irrigate Win Act funding for FY17. And that's what this $929,000 is. We're moving into our, like we said, our phase 3. We've identified a priority list, which the total cost right now is about $2.1 million. And we're going to start working through that with the use of this Irrigate Win Act money and hopefully the water development money, and we'll start working through this priority list. We're still in the mode where we're repairing structures and infrastructure that are in critical need of repair. And just for your information, the tribes are in the process of applying for, under the Public Law 93-638, for taking over the operation and maintenance of the Wind River Irrigation Project. That the application is under review right now, and final review will be done by November the 30th. And we should know by then whether we would be taking over the operation and maintenance. That'll enable us to be in more control of those funds that are coming down from the government during the Irrigate Win Act funding. Just recently, Senator Barrasso helped pass an amendment to that, which extended the Irrigate Act and Win Act money to 2028 rather than 2021. So as long as money is appropriated, we expect to see as much as $35 million a year put into the Irrigate Win Act fund in the Department of Treasury for rehabilitation of those 16 Indian irrigation projects in the West. And with the aid of that, we hope to be moving forward with improving the efficiency of the Wind River Irrigation Project and bringing that deferred maintenance figure down into handled figures. So once again, I appreciate everything you've done for us, and hopefully we can continue this partnership that we've developed with the Wyoming Water Development Commission. I know the tribes, the irrigators on the Wind River Irrigation Project, both tribal and non-tribal. We have numerous non-tribal members on the project, and we appreciate your support.
Any questions for either Harry or me?
Okay, thank you.
That leaves us at the end of the level 3 project block. I just would like to have as big a block approved in one motion. Are there any, first I'd ask Carrie, are there any that should be perhaps taken out based on some of the shifting around that occurred this morning? Although commissioners may want to pull some out too.
Chairman, the one that I might pull out is the Austin Wall Reservoir. I certainly can support the partial recommendation for the outlet structure, again, subject to the transfer of funds into account 2.
That would make it the 6th project in that category, but beyond that, I look to the recommendations. Interstate irrigation, as we talked, we got a math error there. But certainly, I think if you approve that project, is this block vote, then we will adjust that in the bill that would come before you in December.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman,
Senator Dockstader.
thank you. Clarification. Harry, inserting Austin Wall doesn't affect the existing 5 that are already positioned in there?
Chairman, it does not. It makes it one of that block, but then it does have a priority. If the commission were faced with making choices of which of those 6 with limited funding going forward, then it's a priority 6 compared to Dry Creek is a priority 3, Eden Valley's priority 2. Those would be higher priorities, but then the 3 studies remain at priority 7 or 8, so they're lower priority. But at this point in time, we're talking about the entire $5.5 million being transferred from Buffalo Bill to account 2, and that would more than adequately fund all 6 of those projects.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's lift the Austin Wall project out of the block. Is any other projects people want to lift out, Commissioner? No? Then how about a motion to approve the block absent the Austin Wall?
Moved.
Is that a motion by Commissioner Wagner? No? Oh, I'm sorry. Motion by Commissioner Seekin. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Geis. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I just have a question on the motion. Are we, Harry, maybe you can clarify this, are we accepting all of these projects pending the approval of the $5.5 million into account 2, or are we just accepting the ones you've recommended now and we will approve the rest later?
So Mr. Chairman, as I understand the motion is to approve my recommendations in that block. And my recommendations include funding those 5 projects subject to the transfer of funds. And so that's the way it will go into the bill as structured that way.
Excuse me, except, but those 5, all 5 of those projects are not in that block.
Right. So there are 2 in this, 2 as part of this motion. Thank you.
I guess I'm still
We'll
a
pick
little,
up the others.
I guess I'm still a little confused why we pulled out Austin Wall, I guess then.
Well, we pulled it out. We can operate, we can move on it next. So is there any other discussion, confusion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. And now do we have a motion on Austin Wall?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the director's recommendation of no funding on Austin Wall.
I'll second it.
Motion by Commissioner Seekin and a second by Commissioner Bettis. Is there any discussion on that? Motion is.
Does that include though I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, does that include the change we made this morning, or the change in Harry's recommendation this morning, or?
Mr. Chairman, my recommendation, I would follow through that my recommendation was no funding. We had the option that we discussed this morning that you could fund, I think, partial, the outlet structure work, but that's why I was suggesting pull it out if you want to consider it as an add-on. But the motion is clear, no funding for the project.
So if we wanted to add that in, the motion would be defeated and the second motion made, I suppose. So is there any further discussion trying to clarify this project? It's been not recommended as the motion is made. Okay. Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed, nay?
No.
Yeah.
All right, let's have a account here. All those in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. All those opposed, raise your hand. 2. So the motion is accepted, and the recommendation is 0 funds.
4 or was that 5? Because we do need a majority of the number of members here. Maybe 1, 2, 3, 5.
It is 5.
So I think it's 5. I just wanted to clarify.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This has been proven once again to be poor. So, all right, that takes us through the level 3 projects.
Yeah.
And so let's get to the, well, I'll tell you what, let's take a break till 10:15, and we'll come and probably try to, without lunch, get through the rest if we can.
That sounds okay.
The others, the other two. Very good.
What was the theory behind not approving that?
2 years ago. Which we almost had that dealing with unflavored.
They have spent a couple of years really looking at their financing, and they've been able to come up with some additional funding. That turns out to be Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust in terms of the changes. So they're now, in the course of that project, the cost goes up. And so at this point in time, they are seeking from us an increase in the grant amount, $120,000, $120,899, a reduction in the loan amount of $31,000, so that gets us to the increased budget amount of $89,436. And then, as you see, then the other funding source of $91,000 is working to their benefit. And this is a project they've been talking about, trying to repair this structure for a long, long time. So that is the funding request. I'm trying to look at this point. We should have enough time in the schedule. So the requested budget increase is for $89,436.
Questions of Harry on this amendment? All right. Harry, Eden Valley, or is that? Go ahead.
This is a proposed amendment, and this project, looking at the date, we started the history of 2014 with a grant. And originally, when this project started, we were looking at a 50-50 cost share. And the other cost share was with Bureau of Reclamation salinity control dollars, which were awarded. And as you can see, that was in the amount of over $2 million. But in the intervening years, the project costs have gone up. And the Bureau award for the salinity control dollars is fixed. They will not adjust that amount. So the district now is coming back before you. Well, let me back up and tell you that this project was bid. The bids came in high, significantly higher. So we suggested to the district they come back with an amendment. And so their amendment is seeking an additional $910,000, of which a grant is $710,000 and a loan amount of $200,000. And as part of that, I'm kind of stumbling over my words here because the actual budget increase with regards to Water Development Commission funds is not $710,000; it will be $910,000. So with that, we have representatives from the district here.
You're recommending the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I am. Yes.
Go ahead.
Ed Burton, Eden Valley Irrigation District. Again, we appreciate you guys helping us with all of this, and it's made a substantial difference, not only to us in the valley, but lower basin states and everything we go. The problem with this project, the Bureau of Rec took the phase one of this lateral and took them an extra year to get their stuff done and actually start turning dirt to where we could do ours. So everything is a year behind. The prices went up over the year. The Bureau is in process. They're under construction. So if we can get this increase, we will start construction in the fall of 19, as soon as the district can do it. So any questions you've got?
Answer questions. Any questions, comments? Not hearing any, so thanks for coming, and probably be part of a block motion.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Harry, canal
The
piping.
next project is the Piney Cruz Canal piping. This contract award was in 2014, and district representative can talk a little more detail about the issues, but this is where water flows into a off the landscape. There's a large channel that has been cut. The plan was to pipe that, and in that process, the adjoining landowners started to make requests, and so this project has really been hung up with landowner issues that are adjacent to the project. And so the request now is to extend the time 3 years, from 2019 to 2022, in order to allow time to construct the project. And so go ahead and identify yourself.
Okay. Good morning. Tom Harper. I'm one of the board members on the Piney and Cruise Creek Ditch Company Irrigation District. Thank you, state legislature and commission, for the support on this project. We appreciate it. The main problem regarding the landowner situation is that in 2014, when the project was started, we were dealing with one landowner that controlled roughly 80% of the pipeline crossing area. He has since subdivided and sold property. It's now owned by 2 landowners. And so we had to start the easement negotiation all over again. We're also involved in a point of diversion change, which will slightly change the alignment of the pipeline. And hopefully once that's defined and we have the point of diversion change approved, we can proceed with the easements.
Any questions of the sponsor or Harry on this 3-year extension? All right. Thank you for coming.
Mr. Chairman, next project is a small water project program, account 2 funding. And just as we had done for account 1, you see the history of appropriations that have been made, and the reversion dates that are shown. And then at the bottom of this page 1, the only page, you see the history since 2012 of the number of applications we have received in that program. And the number of applicants, as you see, those are growing as well. So at least for 2019, we are projecting there could be upwards of a little over $800,000 in demand for applications. And currently within Water Development Account 2, we have $130,000 available in round numbers. So our recommendation is that we increase the account 2 small water project funding with, or supplement it with a budget appropriation of $700,000. That would give us about $830,000 to be able to spend with regards to upcoming small water projects.
Any questions of Harry on the budget request? Okay. And then the legislative revision, I think we've discussed that.
Skipped over sponsors contingency fund account 2.
What's that?
Under tab T, the sponsors contingency fund.
Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped one there. Okay.
Yeah, and just as I described yesterday with regards to account 1, sponsors contingency fund, I do expect with the improving economy that we will start to see more projects that when they open bids finally, that we'll see that we have budget issues. So within this current account, looking for the number, uncommitted funds, $613,000. You can see the history of some of the projects that we have funded in that regards. You know, some of them are very small, and you're going to handle a smaller request here later this morning. But some of them can also be several $100,000. And so I want to be situated such that we have adequate funds in this fund, that if we do have bids that are coming in high, we're able to keep the projects moving. So my request is to supplement this with an additional $700,000 appropriation request.
Evidence is a mounting of higher construction. Project in. We have covered that, or?
We have covered that. That's really to bring us up to date with regards to the new legislation regarding O&M sinking funds.
I think that allows us to do a block motion to approve the level 3 project amendments unless somebody wants to take one out. And not seeing that, do I have a motion to approve the level 3 project amendments P through N?
I'll make the motion.
Motion by Commissioner Geis, second by Commissioner Little. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Mr. Chairman,
Motion carries. Yes, sir.
I'd like to revisit the Austin Wall project.
You have an amendment to that previous motion?
Yes, we'd like to look at fixing that structure, the head gate.
All right. Harry, could you discuss that a little bit in terms of what that would entail and what it would cost?
So, Mr. Chairman, the sponsor's original request was for structure and lining of canal. Reservoir rehab, $1,340,000. The structure, the outlet works, specifically, if you were to break that out separately, I would recommend an appropriation of $350,000 on that project. And their request is for, that would fund it totally. That would give them funds for a 67% grant and 33% loan.
And that would be for outlet work, structure removal, and replacements. All right. Commissioner Wagner, do you have a motion to amend the previous
Yes.
action to approve $350,000 for the outlet work, structure removal, and replacement?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's the motion by Commissioner Wagner. Is there a second?
I have a clarification, though.
Second, and second by Commissioner Lancaster. Discussion?
I just need a clarification. Is that pending funds being added to account 2 and the 5 projects that are a higher priority being funded? I guess I'm trying to find out where that would fit.
Harry?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely, it would require the transfer of funds from Buffalo Bill to account 2 to take place in order to have adequate funds to do that. And if it's included with the other projects in that category, it would be the third in regards to priorities. Now, Commission, you could certainly change that priority ranking, but I think with the full transfer of dollars moving over, you would have adequate funds for all now 6 of those projects. But it rates with a priority number 6, and the 3 studies are priorities 7 or 8, so they are lower priorities. But if you want to move the studies ahead of this one in terms of ranking, that would actually, I think, fall back to the Commission as a later decision. We'd have to wait for the legislature to take action on the transfer.
And to clarify, I think we've talked about, there's now 6 projects that can come in with the transfer if the select committee so desires to approve that. And this would be, at this time, the 6th.
Mr. Chairman, and so are we looking at, the original was 5.5 million out of the Buffalo Bill account? Would it be an increase out of the Buffalo to cover number 6 projects now, or is it sufficient budget?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, my request, recommendation is, so first of all, the Commission deemed that there was $5.5 million in excess in the Buffalo Bill account from what is needed there. That then triggers that it should be transferred to account 1. My recommendation is to transfer that full sum to account 2 because it's the one in distress. But if you look at the total of those 6 projects, they're really closer to between $2 and $3 million in total. So the remaining balance of that 5.5 would remain in account 2 for future projects in future years. And as we've heard, for example, on the Wheatland Irrigation District project, there's about a $5 million construction obligation that we are not funding today.
I think there's been some clarification on that. Austin Wall project. Is there any further questions or comments? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay.
Nay.
I count 5-2, motion carries. Harry, that takes us on to the level 2 project, starting with the Boulder Irrigation District Rehabilitation.
So, Mr. Chairman, under the second tab U, you have the recommendation for the Boulder Irrigation District Rehabilitation. Right, yeah, okay, level 2 study, looking at alternatives to improve efficiency on their main canal, Boulder Canal, and assess current condition of the spillway at the Boulder Lake Dam. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. The budget, $171,000. This has been a project that you approved back last May to move it forward. Engineer has been selected, and the budget you see reflects the cost proposal from the selected consultant.
Identify yourself. And
Morning, my name is Joe Gillis. I'm a commissioner with the Boulder Irrigation District. I'd like to thank everyone for the opportunity to speak today.
it's okay if you don't.
I think Harry hit the highlights. Basically, the project is just starting to get off the ground, so to speak. We've gone through, the application was approved by Wyoming Water Development. We have selected an engineer. We're just missing the main ingredient here, which is that $171,000.
Other questions or comments? Commissioner Lancaster.
Harry, Chairman, Harry, when we did the consulting interviews on these, did we know that money was going to be that tight? And
So, Mr. Chairman, certainly at your May meeting, you did not have any information in terms of what future construction projects would come in. Those applications for construction were due September 1, and so at that point, project managers within the office started to work those recommendations. They were all due to me on or about the 1st of October. So, but that information was not transmitted to you during the selection process. And again, as I develop these recommendations, that really takes place in the month of October, getting ready for this meeting. So that was information that you were not aware of.
So, follow up, as we go forward and have more applications and more opportunities for consultants, will we have that information available to us so that I'm concerned about consultants and being a person who's done a lot of bidding before. You spend a lot of time and effort bidding, and then you don't get the chance to go through with it.
So, Mr. Chairman, based on this framework of the schedule that is established, you will not have that information because these applications for planning projects are due March 1. You do a preliminary selection at your May meeting. Here's the projects we would like to advance really to consultant selection. That process starts in June and then culminates really the first week of October. And so planning projects, as you can see, represent the minority of funding going into account 2, really account 1 as well. And it's not until September 1 where we have the application deadline for construction projects. So it's the construction projects that are the big draft against the program, the biggest dollar amount. And again, the way it shapes up is we develop those recommendations, but it's really the month of October before I'm able to sit down and look at the entire picture. And that's after you have unfortunately gone through a selection process on planning projects. And Mr. Chairman, that is a concern that's been expressed to myself and staff from the consulting industry that they do spend a fair amount of money developing those proposals, and yet no money has been appropriated for those projects and won't be until the following legislative session.
Let me make a comment too, and I'm familiar with that process as well. One thing that will help as this goes forward and the bidders understand that, I think that'll help I don't think it'll stop them necessarily from bidding, and it'll help that they know the rules, but we're early enough in the process, they may not. So it is a problem, but Commissioner.
Okay, next question is, will there be a priority list moving this one up the line as money comes available in the future?
This particular project? So Mr. Chairman, this year with that transfer that we've been talking about, I believe if the transfer goes forward, then we will have funding for this project. If the transfer does not go forward, then this project will be basically placed on hold. I think it's up to the commission, because March 1 of next year, you'll get another group of planning requests, and how you rate those from a priority perspective versus ones that have already been through the system, this project in particular, and the other two, would be up to the commission. Would you give them a higher priority? I don't know. But again, the priority schedule that the commission has adopted places construction projects with a higher priority. You see those, ones or twos, and planning is falling out as a secondary priority for the program. And I think my personal opinion is that's appropriate because we want to put the dollars to work on the ground. Planning is the early step in that process, but certainly if we have construction projects that are ready to go, then in my mind, that it's appropriate that it is a higher priority. But that means these planning projects are always going to be the last that are considered for funding. And account 2, as you know, is the account that has the most limited funding right now.
Famous for pipe in the ground, so I better stick with that reputation.
Senator Hicks?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Bill, I need to give you a little update as to why there's insufficient funds in this program, and you can directly help resolve that issue. 2 years ago, the Joint Appropriations Committee stripped $12.6 million out of the Water Development Program to fund the Border Control. Your representative from Suffolk County sits on that Joint Appropriations Committee. And so consequently, as a result of that action, we don't have the funds in this program if we use it. So if I can compel you when you get back home to have a discussion with your representative and your senator over there and let them know how important this program is, and that there might be a chance to rectify that in this upcoming legislative session with his support.
Any other comments or questions?
One quick question.
Commissioner Bettis.
Harry, you talked about the prioritization of this on a next year's basis. I guess then and I won't be there, but will the commission have input into that ranking? I think right now we kind of get it from you guys, which is, I understand what's going on there. But I think this is something that we should probably talk about in the work session to see how we're going to do this with this shortage of funds. And also, I guess I'd echo what Senator Hicks says. I think we have to figure out a way we've got money in account 1 that we need in account 2. And we're coming to the day where I think we're going to have to address that one way or another. And I don't know whether that's by changing the percentage or taking a one-time deposit in there, but I think it's something that we probably need to talk about somehow so that we can try to remedy this situation.
So, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Bettis, what I would say, at least in my tenure, we never know what kind of construction project requests we're going to get. We have an inkling sometimes, and several years ago, we knew there were several large reservoir rehab projects coming forward. The governor directed me to seek additional funds at that time, and you may recall that ultimately the legislature did provide those funds. It didn't come from the general fund as requested by the governor. It came from Buffalo Bill, and that's about the time the revenue crisis happened in Wyoming, the most recent one. But we were able to manage that at that point in time. I think this year's request, when I see $23 million of requests in account 2, that's larger than normal. Don't know whether that will continue. It could very well. So I think we've been able to manage it in the past, but ultimately, account 2 is the underfunded account. I say that, but there have been years past where in account 1 we had more projects coming at us, and we did some cash flow maneuvers, funding design only this year. I mean, that's one of the tools we have. So I think we have to take every year based on the requests we're going to get. This year, we happen to have additional funds in account 1. And so I think it could be appropriate from the commission's perspective to recommend to the legislature for this given year, we want to move funds from account 1 to account 2, as the case may be. But every year, it's a new situation based on the requests that come in before you. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Dockstader.
Thank you. And so as a follow-up to this, Director Bondi, I sense and I hear from you that this would be a good time to reassess that account 1 situation. Just a quick follow-up, sound advice on the work session from Commissioner Bettis and very sound advice from Senator Hicks to those representatives, legislative representatives from that specific area. But let's go back to the original question, Harry. I sense that this would be a good time to reassess that account 1 situation.
well, Mr. Chairman, let me clarify. So funds flow into accounts 1, 2, and 3 from the severance tax distribution account. The percentages that flow into each of the accounts are dictated by statute, along with a number of other entities that legislators are more familiar than I. WIDA, General Fund. And so I would not recommend to you that we tinker with those percentages of dollars flowing into the accounts, because I think when you open that up, then you potentially risk losing. I think you could change those percentages and they may all go down. Okay, so I'm content with the current severance tax distribution formulas that are in place. Now, is there an imbalance flowing more into account 1 versus account 2 versus account 3? Every year is different. And this year happens to be a year where the account 2 is getting slammed harder than the others. But I can tell you that the account that receives the least amount of funding is account 3. And so if we were to build out the governor's 10 in 10 project, that has a $300 million shortfall that cannot be made up with the severance tax distribution in that account is $800,000 a year. You're not going to be able to build more reservoirs unless there are direct legislative appropriations into that account, which was what was done in 2005, as I recall, in 6, when that account was set up. That's how it grew to a $150 million account balance, which is now about $100 million has been obligated for projects. So I am not recommending at all that you tinker with the severance tax distribution formulas. Now, in a given year, would it be appropriate to say, from the commission's perspective, legislature, we would like to move so many dollars from account 1 to account 2? I think that's appropriate after they have flowed into the account. And this year we have that transfer happening from Buffalo Bill to account 1. And my recommendation is doing exactly that. I think that's an annual exercise once we have all of the applications in and once we've been through this meeting to say, well, we are short in account 2 and we'd like to move some dollars over. But I don't know that you can do that and set a formula in place that answers that question for the next 5 or 10 years going out. I think it's an annual exercise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? I don't know if they're on the Boulder Irrigation District or the funding issue. Is there any other questions or comments? All right, so thank you for coming. We'll move on to the La Perelle Irrigation District.
Mr. Chairman, La Perelle Irrigation District feasibility study, and specifically this one is looking at the rock structures in the canyon below the dam I've actually, I think after our meeting last May, took a trip up to the district and took a look at these blocks in the canyon. And while I'm not a geologist, if one or more of these blocks should fall, in my mind, there is a real risk that it could damage the dam structure. And so this particular study, I think, taking a more serious look at what are the risks and what the mitigation strategy might be, is an important project. $290,000. We've retained or selected the consultant, I should say. Beyond that, it falls with the other two planning studies that they rate lower in priority by basis of your priority schedule. And as we've talked on funding, I think we have a solution for that. But nevertheless, LaParelle study, I'm recommending funding subject to the transfer into account two.
Welcome, if you could identify yourself and.
Holt Rodeman with LaParelle Irrigation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pete Roush with Respect Consulting.
I also would like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the board and the Select Water Committee for our previous funding for our master plan that was closed out yesterday. Yesterday. That helped us a lot, and it also shed light on where we're at today. I'd answer any questions you may have.
Questions, LaParelle Irrigation District project, comments? Commissioner Wagner.
Mr. Rodeman, did you get your cameras installed to watch the rocks?
We did install some monitoring equipment. I did check. It's on my phone. So I can look at this rock movement. We selected the east side because that's the largest rock. And the district has spent $20,000. Respect came up, installed the monitoring equipment and put it on our phone. And every day I look at my rock just to check my battery, but you can see that rock moves constantly because this monitoring system is set up so minutely, but it's never jumped or anything like that. But the numbers do change constantly with the heating and contracting of the day.
I just would like to point out that this was the medium range plan. There was a more expensive plan in place to do this work, but this one was the middle of the road. And I was really happy with the way Respect came around and presented that. Kudos to them.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, my hat's off to Respect and Commissioner Wagner for that comment too, because these guys have really stepped up. Like you said, it was the middle of the road, and we've taken the smaller amount.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you for coming. I think that puts us in place to have a block motion noting, the motion should note if it's to approve these two projects under level 2 projects that they're subject to the transfer of funds. Do I hear such a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Lancaster, second. Commissioner Wagner. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. It takes us down to the Upper Bluff Level 1 project.
Chairman, again, a planning project that you have made a selection of a consulting firm, Upper Bluff. They are seeking funding for a master plan for their districts, total budget $123,000. Again, subject to transfer of funds to account 2.
Mr. Chairman, thank you again for this opportunity. We are seeking funds for level 1. I understand the funds are a little short and there may be some funds available to transfer. Once again, just like the rest of the state, water is the lifeblood of our agricultural community. This includes both the upper bluff and the bluff. Two separate canals, but run under one board. And so that's why it's combined here. Extremely important, our bluff irrigation system is 100 years old. Basically, what we've been doing the last several years is fix as fail. In some of our structures, we've had some fail, and they've been fixed. But we don't have the expertise that we need to look at all the structures and decide what we need to set our priority on. So that's why we decided to come before you for the level 1 study and continue with that. The rest of the canal systems in the Worland area have been doing this. I don't know why we waited so long, but we did. And so we're asking for that to really decide where we're going as a district and what needs to be fixed, kind of set priorities for that. Much of what I said in the previous presentation about the importance, economic importance, flows right along with this. And so we'd appreciate it if we could do something to obtain some funding for this. Thank you.
Comments or questions? I think we could have a motion on this project, which would also be subject to funding transfers. And we all know what a big fan Jeanette is of master plans, so.
I'm going to make the motion though. I move that we accept the director's recommendation based on the availability of funds.
Motion by Commissioner Seaton and second by Commissioner Little. Did I get that wrong? Okay, Commissioner Lancaster. Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. That takes us, Harry, to the consideration of the sponsors contingency fund request, which possibly the select committee has to take action on. Okay. If you could go ahead and explain that, we can turn it over to Chairman Hunt.
So, Mr. Chairman, back to the small notebooks now. This would be under tab V, as in Victor. Shoshone Irrigation District Rehabilitation 2017. It's a materials only grant in the amount of $234,000. They have opened bids for those materials, primarily the piping materials, and they are a little short. So they have come back and asked that we supplement that budget through the contingency fund for $15,000. And my recommendation is that you approve that.
Mr. Chairman, yes, sir, any further comment on that at all?
On the additional funding?
Yeah.
So I'm Trent Reed from Shoshone Irrigation District. Yeah, we opened our bids up. They did come in a little bit higher than we expected them to. And some of the expenses last year were a little bit higher than what they were estimated to be at too. So that's where we ended up being a little bit short on our funds. When the projections or estimates were put together a couple of years ago, they did not expect the increased expenses on that. So
I apologize. Go ahead.
That's right.
I'm kind of ahead of myself.
So we'll get, I think Chairman Hunt and I are getting it figured out. Well, is there a motion to approve this additional funding from the commission?
I just have a quick question. It's coming out of account 2. So, and to refresh my memory, from the contingency fund, that has nothing to do with the other account. I mean, the account 2 where we're doing these projects, right? It's from a different fund, so to speak.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Seekin, so we have the sponsors contingency fund account 2. That is a separate account within water development where previously appropriated funds have flowed into that. And so we maintain that as a separate balance specific for these purposes, for these purposes. So
It's no bearing
it has
on.
no bearing
Okay.
on future funding of projects.
Okay, perfect.
We had a motion from Commissioner Little, a second by Commissioner Guys.
Mr. Chairman, I just like to confirm, so it's my understanding that we've lowered pressure on this one. I just wanted to confirm that motion would allow us to have the chairman sign it or bring it back to maybe the next meeting. Whatever you're planning.
Mr. Chairman, my preference would be that you authorize the chairman to sign that contract amendment. And we would like to bring it to the chairman before the next meeting. So thank you, Daniel, for.
Part of your motion?
That's part of my motion.
All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Little and a second by Commissioner Guys. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Okay. Select committee, any further discussion or questions? Yes, Representative Larson.
Yes, thanks. I'm going to abstain from this vote. Actually, my wife has some property in part of the project.
Okay. Any further questions, comments? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you.
And now we're at a part of the meeting, as I understand it, the Select Water Committee is going to consider draft legislation. Senator.
Real quick on that, I think we need to ask our staff attorney. I don't know that we have a quorum here of the Select Water Committee. And with the abstention of the vote, whether that was, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. I guess with the abstention, we still have 7. Is that? Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Okay, so, Mr. Chairman, I believe on this piece of legislation, we're going to have a discussion and take public comment on this. We are not going to act on this today in a vote. But so seeing that we do have a quorum still, we can go ahead and move forward and at least have that discussion. So I guess Senator Hicks, do you want to walk us through the bill?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. So this is a discussion that came out of, one of the items that was assigned to the Joint Ag, Public Lands, State and Public and Water Resources Committee this year was look at some of the border control processes and procedures. We took testimony at both meetings. Part of the discussion of those, because there is significant overlap between Select Water and that Joint Agricultural Water Resources Committee, was to look at this piece of legislation. And so it's really got 2 parts. The first part, 413502, deals with the superintendents for the Board of Control. It goes under appointments, removals, numbers of qualifications, and examinations. And what the bill does is go into that provision, and it adds new languages that requires the advice and consent of the Wyoming Senate on any appointment of any members of the Board of Control. I don't know that we did a really thorough analysis, but I'm not aware of any other board or commission in the state of Wyoming that doesn't go through. I mean, we do barber examiners and beautician examiners that all go through the advise and consent process, no different than the members of the Water Development Commission. Every one of these, when you go through an appointment, has to get the advise and consent of the Wyoming Senate. So just looking that there was a deficiency when it comes to appointment of superintendents to the Board of Control, what the first section would do would just add that those appointments would have to have the advice and consent of the Senate to the Board of Control. Do have a proposed amendment to that section. Josh, do we have enough of those to at least hand out to the select committee? So let me run through the amendment on that section. So what the amendment does is, as a further looked into this, is right now those are appointments go through and why they would require the advice and consent of the Senate. There's no duration of terms. Once you're appointed to the Board of Control, for all practical purposes, I think it becomes a lifetime appointment. We don't even do that with Supreme Court justices in the state of Wyoming. Those guys are term limited out based on, or not term limited, but they're limited based on age. They're not lifetime appointments. So what the amendment does is just go in and says that every 6 years, that anybody on the Board of Control would have to go back through the appointment process. Again, very similar to what you do on the Water Development Commission. You get appointed for 4 years. If you want back on, you have to go back through that appointment position from the governor. Each time that happens, you have to go through an advise and consent of the Senate. So this just sets a 6-year term for those members of the Board of Control. The reason that much of the testimony that we took this year is there's a perception, whether it's real or not, that some of the members of the Board of Control, because these tend to be lifetime appointments, become unresponsive on the Board of Control. So this provides a checks and balances, and I think that's just good government, that periodically these individuals would have to come back, be reappointed by the governor with the consent of the Senate. I think that's a good process, because one of the things that let me describe typically what happens with the process with the consent of the Senate is the governor takes those nominations. You guys on the commission have all filled out those forms for appointment to the commission. He gives that then to the Senate. We review those many times, if not almost all times. Those senators that have an appointment from their district call the folks back home and say, what about Commissioner X, and what do you know, and is this a good individual? So it provides that input from your constituencies as elected officials to get input into these governor appointments. The 6-year term, I think, is important because you do want some continuity in these positions, and you don't want them to make them become political positions, but because the water is so important, and what the Board of Control does is you want some continuity. So they would go through a 6-year appointment process, but there's no limit on the number of terms that a superintendent could serve on the Board of Control. That's what the amendment does. The second part of the bill gets to the designation of commissioners to represent the state on all interstate compacts. Again, only thing this does is that the governor appoints somebody to an interstate compact, that just has to have the advice and consent of the Senate. Again, it's to primarily broaden that, to get more input onto these appointees to those interstate water compacts. Mr. Chairman, that's what the bill does, and that's what the amendment does. And I think it is appropriate to go ahead and do the public comment, and then maybe take this up with the amendment at the next meeting.
All right, thank you, Senator. Before we do that, any further comment before we open it up to the public? Okay, public comment. Anyone like to come forward? Yes, ma'am. Come on up.
I guess this is really for the members of the committee, but hello also to the Water Development Commission. My name is Ann McKinnon. I'm a former member of the Water Development Commission. I am a student of Wyoming water law. I'm just in the middle of trying to finish a book on its history. I've an adjunct professor at the university. I have a PhD in economics and a law degree. I wanted to suggest, obviously all of you are here because we all think that water is extremely important to Wyoming. And that's why the state engineer and the Board of Control are in the Constitution. They're not simply state agencies under, that can be easily changed. Clearly, this legislation could occur. The state engineer is, under the Constitution, is appointed by the governor and approved by the Senate. But I think if you really consider what the state engineer does, you might want to think about having that be the limit into which politics should enter into the administration of water in Wyoming. The superintendents, comparing the Board of Control to a board of engineer examiners or barbers, I think, anyway, whatever the senator mentioned, or water development commissioners. Water development commissioners are not in charge of the district that they're in any kind of administrative matter. Superintendents who serve on the Board of Control, they superintend each of the four of them, one of the four water districts in the state. They're in charge of whether or not a headgate will be shut. The superintendent, for instance, in Division 1, has to think about all the implications of the North Platte decree under the North Platte most recent settlement, the Platte River Recovery and Implementation Program, counting acreage, counting how much depletions are. These are important jobs that the state engineer needs to be able to appoint. And they aren't the kind of political appointment where we as water commissioners as water development commissioners, we all tried to be in touch with the people in our districts to understand what their needs were. The superintendents are very much in touch with people in their districts, but they have an important administrative position that none of the boards that you're discussing have, like the EQC, the board, all of those are quite different. And I think bringing more politics into the administration of Wyoming water could be something that you would regret in time. I think that's also true of the appointments of the people on the interstate compact commissions. As you all know, the interstate compacts are really crucial to Wyoming's future in terms of how we're able to manage and live with our interstate streams. And those compact commissioners need to be quite in touch with the state engineer himself or herself. And the state engineer, I believe, I may be getting confused here, is a member of some of those commissions. So to imagine some future Wyoming Senate, undoubtedly not the current Senate, which is, very thoughtful and would be quite restrained, but some future Wyoming Senate deciding that the state engineer should not be on, for instance, the Upper Colorado River Basin Compact Commission is probably something you don't want to make room for. So I would just suggest that I think this legislation is inappropriate for water administration, which is so important in Wyoming that it is enshrined in the Constitution. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? And members of the commission, feel free if you'd like to chime in as well. Okay. All right. Oh, wait, Senator Meyer.
I can't hear you.
Okay. Sorry, Jerry. It says that from time to time, the state engineer is going to conduct an examination for candidates for the position of division superintendents. I guess, have you ever been at one of those examinations or seen an examination? Do you know? It goes on a little bit and says that, they just generally need to know about irrigation laws and their administration in their district, and what goes on there, which makes sense. But how many people in the state might be able to qualify for superintendent's job? I had heard that they actually, I don't know, the state engineer has to have a degree, I think, in hydrography or some hydrology or something, but I'm not sure about the superintendents.
My understanding, I'm not sure there's something to be present for. I think, like, for instance, in Division 2, I think there might have been at least 4 applicants most recently. And my understanding is they take a written exam as well as examination of their qualifications. I believe the state engineer has to be an engineer, but that's not true for the superintendents, but they do have to have, I can't say statutorily, but they're expected to, as you say, know something about it. So often they've had experience of some type. I've often seen people who are water commissioners, not water development commissioners, but commissioners who are working on the streams have then applied for superintendent and moved up. And sometimes somebody who's been in the state engineer's office. But certainly for the state engineer job, you see people who have never worked in the office come into that position. So I don't know that I'm just thinking sort of out loud about how that works. But so I've heard of people worrying about those exams, feeling that, am I going to make it, even pass the exam, much less than for a recommendation to be hired. But that's as much as I would know.
We had 4 people at the last one, so I guess there's quite a few people that have the ability to be a superintendent. It's not a huge pool, but it's not a pool that's too restrictive. Not 1 or 2 people apply.
I think that's right. I don't know whether all 4 of those passed the exam, for instance. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, a question, Ian. So based on the supposition of your premise that you should look at this because of the importance of the politicalization, would you then come back and say that we need to modify our Constitution under Article 8, Section 5, which is the state engineer?
No. I mean,
Is he less important?
No, I think that's the extent to which politics ought to enter. I've read some fascinating letters from the 30s from actually a manager of the Wheatland Irrigation District who was writing to the head of the Republican Party when the new governor had just been elected, talking about exactly what he thought about 6 different possible state engineers. So that clearly involves some politics, and that's probably enough. I mean, I think the constitutional decision was to do that. But I mean, the state engineer has major policy decisions that he makes. But the guys who work below him on the different divisions, I would think, like I say, I think that's enough to have those politics which do enter. There's plenty of evidence that they have and do to the state engineer appointment level. But once that decision has been made, and I believe the Senate approves those as well, right? Doesn't it say with the Senate approves the governor's appointment? I think the Constitution says that. For state engineer, that should be enough rather than trying to get down further and further into the lower levels of the agency.
Well,
Yeah, quick question. So the question becomes is the way it's currently structured, these are lifetime appointments. And so how with the testimony that we took at the Ag Committee, there was tremendous level of dissatisfaction with some individuals around the state with how those superintendents are administering their duties in those divisions. And we took that testimony at a couple of meetings. So what's the remedy? So what you're trying to talk about is politics. What we're trying to get at is elected officials is good government. And so how do we get to that issue if it isn't checks and balances within the system that when my constituents come or somebody else's constituents come and say, we have some real concerns with this appointed individual, what's the checks and balances?
Well, I heard a good deal of that testimony, and I think I've reviewed most of it. Most of it had to do with the time which processes took in front of the Board of Control. And personally, I've thought that the remedy for that would be something like, I mean, for one thing, the Board of Control is dealing with the property records of private property rights, so that the question of them getting something right is quite important and getting the details right. But one of the concerns there was that sometimes some petitions can take 2 or 3 years. The board itself doesn't like that very much. At least I've heard them express that. But I think that could be remedied by, and the concern was the expense. I mean, you had people talking about the time and expense about that. And yet we're trying to create reliable state records that can be referred to 100 years from now. So I was thinking that and I appreciate the opportunity to tell you this, that the remedy might be, and there's a parallel at someplace else in the state engineer's office, that if you had the state engineer put on seminars for engineers who design these petitions and do the map, and if they were educated, and then the petitioners who are water users all over the state could hire anybody from that list. If they did hire anybody from that list, there would be a fund so that they would only pay half the expense and the state would pay the other half. Because those are really the concerns that were expressed to you. It wasn't about, at least that I heard, individual superintendents. I also think that if there were concerns about individual superintendents, that goes up to the state engineer and to the governor. I know complaints go up directly to the governor, so that those lifetime appointments are not lifetime in the sense that somebody can't be fired. So that level of constituent concern would get there. But again, often what you have is constituents who are concerned. If they were complaining about an individual superintendent, they might be complaining because he administered the stream in a way that they didn't like, but some of their neighbors liked. So you don't necessarily, and I'm sure you guys never do, worry about only responding to the squeaky wheel. But you need to have, in water administration, you need to have a considered process for weighing all those things, and the state engineer and the governor, I think, can do that in terms of whether they want to if they really think that an individual superintendent is exceeding what it needs to be done in terms of fair administration of water.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know that I necessarily agree with Ms. McKinnon's characterization of all the testimony that we took on. Clearly that captured part of it, but not all of it. So with that, thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, further questions? Okay, thank you very much. Further public comment? Yes, Director Terrell.
Yeah, it's good.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee and of the commission. Just a couple of thoughts. I was made aware of this bill a week or two ago when it came out, and have thought a bit about it. I would not necessarily be in favor of the bill, only because I'll provide some background, but I don't know that what we're doing now is not working. Certainly, these, especially superintendents, do serve at the pleasure of the governor. To the extent that they misbehave, or even I do something that gets up to that office, while the state engineer's term is constitutional, if I had real problems with my boss, I would vacate. Those superintendents have that same obligation. So while some of them are in their job a long time, Craig Cooper, Mike Whitaker, Randy Tullis was in 13 years, Jade Henderson, a long time, they still have an obligation to perform. I would differ a little bit in the characterization made by Senator Hicks that they become unresponsive. I think that they would take great exception to that. We are on the phone, we are visiting people, we are responding to calls. That doesn't mean that everybody always likes them. I understand that. In the water business, believe me, there's an anecdote. When I took this job, Victor Anderson, a friend of mine, said, "Why do you want that job? When you're done, half the state will hate you." And he was partly right. It's more like 2/3, I think, when your time is up. So for me, I guess, I take great pride in what we do, working hard. I know the superintendents do. Now that, it's really, though, a policy call on your part if you want these people to be confirmed. I certainly understand, and it's a great discussion to have. I would point out we have a dozen interstate stream commissioners in the state. There are, well, I'm sorry, 4 superintendents, 4 Upper Colorado River Commission commissioners, the main commissioner, that is me, and 3 alternates. There's 1 commissioner on the Yellowstone River Commission and 3 on the Bear River Commission. So you're looking at 10 to 12 potentially additional hearings for those confirmations. Whether they're confirmed or not, I don't think, and this is not going to the question of the 6-year term. I think that's a separate question, but they still have that obligation to perform. I have been through a disciplinary action with a superintendent in my past. I have recommended to the governor that they let go of water commissioners in the past. The governor has to do that. I know that in the past, governors have let superintendents go for cause, or they don't even need cause. However, they are at the pleasure. So that, just know that that authority is there regardless. One of the questions that came up was about the examinations, and since myself and the administrator of the Board of Control prepare and give those examinations, I thought I'd give you a little bit of history. We have a bank of exam questions that we go back to periodically. Typically, when we hear that a superintendent will be retiring, they've all been real good about giving me 6 months or so to plan for a replacement. And so we will go to the bank of questions and pull together an exam. Sometimes it takes them all day. It can be an 8-hour exam. It covers everything from what's the difference between an original, a supplemental, an additional supply, what's a secondary permit, what's the difference between the groundwater irrigation permit and surface water, how would we give them scenarios on regulation on a stream system and ask how they would approach it. There are hydraulic calculations on reservoirs and channels like a ditch or a spillway. It can go into personnel. We ask them how they would handle certain personnel issues, because they not only have to be technically savvy, they've got to be able to manage a staff of 12 to 18 people and understand employment law, essentially. So, but it's about 40 to 50 questions. We don't release the exam because we don't, you can talk to people who've taken it, and any of the superintendents will tell you it was a pretty rugged day. But we don't want that bank of questions out for possible future exams. So we've had at times 1 or 2 applicants. There was one time I had 1 applicant who was relatively inexperienced, and I could not forward just 1 name to the governor. And we waited until we had another applicant or 2, tested all of them, and then forwarded the list to the governor. So it's, and sometimes we have some of our water commissioners come in and take the exam for the practice of it. They may have no intention of becoming a superintendent, but they can apply. And if they do, we'll have them come in. We have had people apply from out of state, but because it's a proctored exam, they would have to come to Cheyenne to take that exam. And more often than not, that test, they decline to do that and pull their name. We have hired an assistant superintendent from out of state. He came up from New Mexico some years ago. But we can have 1 or 2 applications. We can have 4 or 5. And we take those that get passing grades on the score and forward those names to the governor. And then if there's a clear leader in that list, I may point that out, but it's still his choice.
What is the required score? Is that somewhat relative to how everybody performs?
It's about 70%. I think some it's a tough test though. And if we have somebody who's been in the field, and if you have not been a water commissioner you're going to have a hard time with that test. That's the number we tend to see. We don't have a fixed score. If I have a person with 15 years experience and managerial experience and they come in with a 69, I may still forward that score to the governor. So, or that name, but we can tell in reviewing the exam whether they've got the understanding or not. So, and it's always a little bit different test. And so it's not exactly, it's kind of like taking a PE exam. You'll get a different bank of questions one year than you will the next. So just to keep people on their toes. But I've never forwarded a name to the governor I did not feel could do a job. So, that's just some of the, since the question came up about exams, I just thought I'd give you some of our experience with that. So whenever we have a superintendent retire, we'll go to that bank of questions and we'll start advertising.
In the case of, if we're talking, any question, committee or commissioners? In the case of circumstances where there has been removal or request to resign their positions, without going into the details, how egregious or long-standing were the complaints against those individuals?
Here's one historic one that comes to mind. I don't recall that it's happened recently. Floyd Bishop's father, L.C. Bishop, was superintendent of Water Division 1 for 18 years. There was a gubernatorial election coming, and one of the candidates was espousing that Seminole Reservoir ought to have a 1904 priority, similar to Pathfinder or identical to Pathfinder. And LC felt very strongly that priority mattered, and he went up and down the river saying, this candidate is wrong. We can't do that. That's bad policy. And I don't remember if that was an incumbent or there was a change shortly after that. Anyway, that speaking out on his part got him fired. The next governor that came in very shortly after that hired him back as state engineer. So we've always counseled our guys to be very cautious about politics. I do not wear mine on my sleeve. I don't go to fundraisers for either party, particularly because I was counseled coming in, we regulate everybody, Republicans, Democrats, independents. They don't need to know my politics because it's not part of my business. It's not how I look at their head gate. I counsel my superintendents to do the same thing. So.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know where this whole discussion of politics is come into play. That's not what this bill attempts to do or even addresses the politics. What the bill does is says that there's 90 elected officials around the state of Wyoming. And typically when there's a concern with something that goes on with a state agency personnel of any agency, the first person they do is they don't go to the governor. Is they come to you as a local elected official. And all of this bill does is say, look, we're going to be more responsive to our constituents, and we're going to set up a checks and balances within government for our constituents that say, look, there's another process out here other than just to do all, you got to go all the way to governor. So here's some of the testimony that we received. And why a lot of times you may or may not hear a complaint about a superintendent is there is a fear within the water users of the state of Wyoming. If they go make a complaint to the governor and there's no action that's taken, that there's potential for retaliation against those water rights holders. Now, I'm not telling you that that happens, but there's a perception out there. So a lot of times you don't hear that, and they're really afraid to take that up to the governor's office. So this doesn't set up a position where Senate confirmation is going to review these or not. What it does is it afford an opportunity for you to represent your constituents, go out and get more information without having to involve the government in a personnel issue. So it is more about checks and balances within government than it is about trying to interject politics in the administration of water. So that's what the bill attempts to do, is address some of those concerns that we've heard. Is they'd like more oversight over the superintendents because of this fear that's out there and be more responsive to our constituents, not to interject some level of political party bias in the administration of water. So, Mr. Chairman, I think if there's any additional public comment would be appropriate, but that's what the bill's trying to do.
Yeah, and I mean, I appreciate that. Let's, refrain from further direct comment on the bill until any more questions for Director Terrell? Going once, going twice. Okay, thanks, Pat.
Thank you.
Any, further public comment? Further public comment? Going once, going twice, public comment is closed. All right, now, committee, further discussion on the bill. Again, we're not acting on this today, just having a discussion about it, so. Further discussion, comments, questions? Okay. Yeah, Commission, I guess, and I would, I also invite Commission to add anything, but no, yes, no, okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Hunt. Harry, you have some comments on written disclosure forms and then a very brief update, I would believe, on the Gillette Madison. Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, reminder.
Nothing to do with it. I'm just sitting next to you, buddy.
As a commissioner, you required to file a disclosure form with the Secretary of State's office. Katie has copies. Pass those out. So it's just a friendly reminder. I will be glad to gather those up if you want and take those back to Cheyenne, and we'll deliver those to the Secretary of State's office as required by the statute. Or if you want to file those directly with the Secretary of State's office, you're welcome to do that. We do like to keep a copy in water development because we've had questions in the past of the commissioner coming back, what did I say last year, or as the case may be. But those are not public documents from my office, but they will be public documents, I believe, in the Secretary of State's office. So either way, but just a reminder that you are required to file that again by January 1 of the new year. Okay. And with that, Mr. Chairman, with regards to Gillette Madison, I think we've been having that update for the last 2 days or so. So I have nothing further to add in that regards.
We have a future meeting schedule of this December, 2 days, 12th and 13th in Cheyenne. We're going to present a draft omnibus bill to the committee, which will then review it on the next date, the 14th, and then the next meetings are 2019. Any other issues to come before the commission or the committee?
Mr. Chairman, if I could address a question to Chairman Hunt. The Cheyenne meeting of the commission will be at the Water Development Office. I did talk to Josh about this, but your meeting, I would offer up the building for the 15th, well, excuse me, the 14th for your committee meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. So we got on that, Josh. Cool. All right.
Hearing nothing else, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Lancaster, second by Commissioner Wagner. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Meeting adjourned. Enjoy your ride home.
Well, I've got.
Are we done for the day?
Yeah, we really have some